The family members of Stephon Clark, a 23-year-old black man who was shot and killed by police in Sacramento, and he was unarmed when this happened, has requested an independent autopsy to see how many bullets struck him, how he died, and where the bullets entered his body. Now, what we knew at the time was that the two police officers involved in this case had fired at least 20 bullets in his direction. And what we know now through this independent autopsy is that he was struck 8 times. So let's give you the details on that. Stephon Clark, the unarmed 22-year-old killed by Sacramento police officers earlier this month, was shot 8 times, with most of those bullets hitting him in the back. 6 of the 8 shots struck Clark in the back, while the 7th bullet hit him slightly to the side of his body, but to the back of the side. Okay, so the vast majority of the bullets hit him in the back, which actually goes against the narrative that the cops were putting out there, indicating that they thought he posed an imminent threat, indicating that it appeared that he had a gun in his hand. We now know that it was a cell phone. The fact that they shot him in the back tells you something. Someone isn't necessarily an imminent threat if their back is turned to you. Here's what we also know from this autopsy. Bullets struck Clark in the neck, back, and thigh, breaking bones and piercing his lung. The bullets combined to make Clark bleed massively. We also found out that his death didn't happen instantly. His death could have taken anywhere between 3 to 10 minutes. And if you recall the original report that we did on this story where we showed you the videos, the entire thing was so devastating. But after they had shot him, they had fired 20 bullets. After he had already been laying there on the ground, it took them a while to, first of all, call paramedics. And then once paramedics got there, it took a while for them to even approach him because they were convinced that he was posing a threat, even though he wasn't moving and he had been laying in the same place for a pretty long period of time. So I'm glad that the independent autopsy was done, just so we can get a clear picture of how he was struck, where he was struck, and how he died from these bullet wounds.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you and the Young Turks have been continuing on the story and also exposing the spin around this. And as I thought I remembered, they said that the Sacramento Police Department had alleged that the body cams were turned off beforehand and they couldn't get material. So now we are told that there is some audio from the body cam. So I don't know what is going on, but this is very typical for the way that Black life is treated in America. If this was a imminent threat or if it was some sort of situation, I know somebody who is going to counter this will say, well, he was fleeing and there was footage of him running from backyards. Well, okay, cool. Dylan Roof shot up Charleston Church and he was walked out and taken to Burger King.
Yeah.
Right? So there was no attempt to try to, if there was a case against him, to arrest him civilly. And the indignity too of what happened to his body. His body was so brutalized by the police, by this hailfire, that he was Muslim. Imams who were trying to prepare his body for the burial ceremony could not even do it. They had to do a dry version of it because it was mortifying. And
remember, they handcuffed him. They handcuffed his dead body.
Yes, and so that is the part of the indignity. That's what people were talking about when Michael Brown was shot dead in the street and publicly executed, was that his body was laying in his own blood for 4 hours. So it's the cuffs on top, not calling the paramedics on time. But this is what America does in terms of how it treats Black life, not only as disposable, but as criminal before it even has a chance to speak.
So let me just fill in a few blanks for anyone who might have missed the original story. And please do go back and watch that in case I miss anything. But to give you context, authorities were called because there was someone burglarizing vehicles in the neighborhood. And so these cops are out looking for that suspect and they see Stephon Clark and wrongly identify him as the suspect. He was not the suspect burglarizing these cars. no one knows what kind of communication happened prior to the shooting, but Stephon Clark did run away from them into his grandmother's backyard. Now, some people might be saying, well, why is he running? If he's not guilty, why would you run? Well, you have to look at the situation in Sacramento, the tension between police officers and the community there to kind of understand why minorities might flee or run away from cops or not trust them or be afraid of them. So just to give you some specific numbers, Clark is one of at least 269 people fatally shot by police so far this year, and that's according to the Washington Post, which has been compiling this data since 2015. Now, if you look specifically at Sacramento, police have fatally shot 6 people since 2015, including Clark. 5 of the 6 have been black men. And so the black community there, very understandably, is distrustful toward the cops and fearful toward the cops. And so if you kind of understand that environment that they're in, you can understand why someone might run, even if they're not guilty of doing anything wrong.
It just seems like it happens over and over again.
Yeah.
And in the past, we hadn't had videos of this. I mean, it's weird that the silver lining is something so graphic and so terrible that and we have to force ourselves and we have to force everyone to go through the experience of watching it, because it reveals just how ridiculous it is, how terribly, profanely ridiculous the default situation is. Those moments that no one ever thought about, like that the process is to handcuff a dead body. When you see people getting shot in their car and then you just watch like a police officer freak out that he shot someone, but doesn't help. The protocol is not to seek or administer medical attention. Those are the things we need to see to believe, and then also see to change. And it's tough because on the one hand, we see it happening again. We do have, I want it to change. I just don't see it happening, and I don't know what it's gonna take, because you see the same pattern occurring over and over again, where the police haven't really said like, yeah, this was wrong. This was bad. He didn't have a gun.
No, it's the same week that Alton Sterling's, the police officer that killed him, was freed of all charges.
Well, this is also the kind of stuff the police are doing, are the kind of things that law enforcement looks for in criminals, which is a changing story that seems to be just utterly convenient and only changes when you call out the inconsistencies in it.
That's a great point. I'm really mousy today because I'm losing my voice, but because of this story, I wanted to be here. You're right, before the cameras, I'm from Miami. McDuffie, who got shot on a motorcycle in the back, Neville Johnson in Miami, that my neighborhood burned to the ground. So when I think about this stuff, I think about 2 things that I've seen on the internet trending this week. A friend of mine posted on Facebook about how she had to take her son to everybody in her neighborhood and introduce her black son to everybody in the neighborhood, because she saw on the Nextdoor app that every time they saw a strange young black man or a black male in the neighborhood, they would call the police. And she had to have this uncomfortable talk with her son, which all of us who have black sons have to have with our sons, which you've heard me say here over and over again, which is the talk that now white people are having with their children about shootings in their high schools. But we have to have these talks with our sons all the time. Now, we could sit here and talk about the police all the time, but I really want to have a call to action. A lot of you get on our Facebook pages, you attack us, you say these things about police officers who are good and are not these race soldiers that are out here murdering these black men. Well, I say to you, then what are you doing to help when you're standing by, when you don't say anything? We need those good police officers to say something, because at this point, what are we going to do to make things happen? You ask, you don't see it changing. How does something like that change? How does something like that change? Well, what I saw is black people went out in numbers to see Black Panther. And those dollars really made a difference and made that like the biggest movie a Marvel movie in the history of all time. So if black people make an effort to make something like that happen economically, then you have to use your dollars to make a difference for this very cause. And we gotta stop spending our dollars on the organizations that support this systemic racism. And it's everywhere. You have to educate yourselves. You guys went crazy to find out who, and I say you guys, I'm talking about the people. You go crazy to find out who bit Beyonce on the face. Why don't you go crazy to find out who's the chief of police in your community? Who do you need to vote out? Who do you need to get out of there? Because these people that are supporting these race soldiers are assassinating our children. And the dehumanization of Black lives lives on the internet more than anywhere. You share Sharkeisha fighting and fighting and fighting, Black girls fighting all the time. And that's how you justify a police officer snatching a young Black girl out of her chair by her neck in a classroom. At some point, we have to use our consciousness. Those of us who know better have to do better. And we have to call upon our allies to say, what you got on this? What are you gonna do to help this?
Well, I just want to add something that is happening in Los Angeles, and I think more cities should follow the lead, which is there was a successful call for a civilian review board of the police department, and now they're pushing for more powers, subpoena power as well, because initially they tried to fill the civilian review of the police with retired police officers, so they were able to vote in different appointees, but now they're calling for further empowerment. So there is something that's happening, but there's a city too that is tied to, I'm speaking to Los Angeles specifically, but nationally as well. When we think about prison industrial complex, what's tied to that is also policing, because police need to fill up those prisons. They need to fill up the jail cells. And so here in the city of Los Angeles, the Board of County Supervisors approved $3.6 billion to expand the jails.
Right.
And that Los Angeles is the capital jailer of the world. And so what we need to do is push the whole entire system. So it's not just the police, it's the entire system that they are a part of that is popular culture does play into the criminalization, but the criminalization is there for a reason, to feed a system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to your point, Aida, and I think you made such a great point about how there are good cops out there. I don't think people deny that there are good cops out there. I mean, when you really think about the amount of communication, just face-to-face contact everyday civilians have with police officers, the vast majority of those instances are nonviolent, are totally fine. There are no issues there. And you hear about the bad stories. But with that said, in order to change this system, you need people within that system who also call for reform and don't go out of their way to protect the bad cops, because that's what we're seeing over and over again. Again, I have no doubt that there are great cops out there, but you become complicit when you are silent and you choose to defend, other officers that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, because if someone was beating a disabled person, I have no doubt that every single person on this panel would interfere and do something about it. So can you imagine that you have the power of a badge and a gun? Why won't you interfere and do something about it?
And that's what these civilian review boards are asking for, is the power to hold these cops accountable in a court around other people who are part of the community that our tax dollars pay for this.
Right, I know.
And we should have a say for what we've invested in.
You just watched the video by the Young Turks, home of the revolution. If you'd like to get a lot more than that, get the full show by becoming a member. tytnetwork.com/join.